Good morning, friends. Welcome to Ecoholics YouTube channel. My name is Avinash Agarwal, and in this lecture, I'll be discussing with you important current affairs for 10th June 2024. This lecture will serve as a one-stop shop for all economics-related current affairs that is happening. This is a series of lectures that we started on 1st May 2024, and today is 10th June 2024. So we have spent at least good 32 lectures. Each lecture has been having a duration of roughly half an hour. So I have created content approximately worth 15 to 16 hours for you guys. If you have still not watched these, you can binge watch these lectures in one go. If you have watched these lectures already and want to revise everything that I have discussed with you, you can do that as well. If there's any doubt, you can get in touch with us. If you want the notes associated with this lecture, you can download the Ecoholics app, do a quick free registration, and then go to study material section and download it from the current affairs section. So everything is possible provided you are willing to put in the effort for yourself. Just one suggestion from my side, please maintain a small diary, and in that small diary, make a habit that you will download our note from the app, and then you will convert it into a 200 words ka note, maximum 200 words ka note, right? So 200 words is equivalent to almost one answer in an examination, nothing more than that. Making that note should not take more than 15 or 20 minutes of your time after you have watched this lecture, right? So just keep these basic sanitation points in check, right? And everything else will be fine. So let us start. The first topic that I want to discuss with you today is related to the next government's tech agenda. So I'll be talking about a lot of, data points regarding Aadhaar. I'll be talking about UPI. I'll be talking about chips, IT, and so on and so forth, right? So digital infrastructure rollout has been a game changer in India. So whether it is Aadhaar or whether it is UPI or whether it is FASTag, all these developments, all these so-called platforms or new tools of governance, they have had a significant impact on how things are done in India. So we have done well on technology diplomacy. We agreed, the G20 ministers, they agreed on a definition, framework, and working principles of digital public infrastructure, right? So that digital public infrastructure definition that has been agreed upon. So India has been able to give a significant amount of input into that because of our experience with, let us say, Aadhaar, with, let us say, UPI, and with let us say, FASTag. So there was this report that was released, and I wanted to note down this particular data point very, very carefully. There was this report that was released by NASSCOM and Arthur D. Little. So Arthur D. Little is world's oldest consultancy firm, and they estimated that the collective impact of Aadhaar, UPI, and FASTag on India's 22 GDP at $32 billion. I wanted to note down this number very carefully, and whenever you are speaking about digital public infrastructure, or whenever you are speaking about, let's say, Aadhaar, UPI, FASTag, even individually, I want you to quote this number. This will leave a positive impact upon the examiner. This will tell the examiner that you know what you're talking about. You know what's happening in the recent current affairs, so to speak. We are having more systems which will be coming out with going ahead. So this $32 billion impact is only going to increase. It's not going to decrease. So as the size of our economy increases, as the number of Aadhaar enabled transactions increases, as the size and number of UPI transaction increases, as the toll collection, the electronic toll collection becomes more savvy going ahead from the stage of FASTag, where we have to go to a toll naka and stop and pay, to a certain extent, where we will be going to a model where we don't need to stop. We will be paying as per the usage of national highway length and kilometers. So that is going to the next stage. So these public infrastructures are only going to get better and better, and therefore their economic impact is only going to increase. So please be mindful of that economic impact and do quantify that economic impact in the examination. This report further goes on to say that lack of interconnectedness among government ministries, lack of real-time data availability, limited language expansion for users, and future partnerships beyond government services. These are the challenges that need to be tackled. This is extremely beautiful. Never ever only tom or only sing praises for government's initiatives in your answers. Never do that. That is going to be detrimental for your own progress. So what you have to be able to do is identify challenges and then make suggestions, make recommendations how those challenges can be overcome. So these are the four beautiful challenges with our DPI. That is, A, they are interconnected, not so much as we want them to be, lack of real-time data availability, limited language expansion, and not having partnerships beyond government services. So we need to move ahead on each of these on each of these verticals. We need to make a progress. All right. So that, okay, now let's talk about the chip challenges. Okay, so the idea being that semiconductor chips are very, very important. So we have seen that the government has recently allotted nearly $10 billion incentive package for semiconductor projects. So whether it is Tatas or Microns of the world, they are involved in implementing these projects in India. And the idea being that we want to make India a global semiconductor manufacturing hub. Of course, this idea has received a lot of criticism, particularly from former RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan. Rajan's point of view is very simple to understand, that a lot of the subsidy has been pumped into, let us say, making India a small-time player in the semiconductors value chain. This money could have been used to create, ecosystem which could have created, many more jobs, and let's say around 5,000 jobs that will get created in the semiconductor factories. So that's what the basic crux of the criticism is, that you could have used these resources elsewhere, maybe in education, maybe in healthcare, maybe in human capital formation, maybe to incentivize your labor intensive sectors. Any of these things would have been a better bet than putting this money into semiconductors plant, is what the basic idea of this is. Now we need to prioritize job creation. We need to focus upon labor intensive industries. These are the areas where we need to focus upon. Of course, semiconductors hold huge strategic importance, and we have only a limited window of opportunities where we can enter into the supply chain and start playing a role in this supply chain. So there are two sides of the coin. One side of the coin will say that yes, whatever investments we are doing in semiconductor chips today will bear fruits tomorrow. So while it may appear expensive today, tomorrow we will have much larger benefits for ourselves. That is one way of looking at it. Then there is another way of looking at it, is that this money that is poured into semiconductors, chips, incentives, subsidies, etc., would have been used better elsewhere. Both sides of the coin are known to you now. IT jobs crisis. So services companies, they have been creating a lot of jobs for our engineers for decades now. A lot of people go for computer science and IT with the hope that they will be able to join TCS, Infosys, Wipros of the world. But now these companies have to also focus upon their bottom line. They are investing quite heavily upon technologies which may replace your typical man hours or jobs which are done by human beings. That is a new challenge that we need to overcome. So if you look at the headcount of TCS, it increased by 339,000 in the last 10 years, right? But in FY24, its employee count, it reduced by 13,000. Similar kind of trend is witnessed in the larger industry as well, that the headcounts are not increasing. Cutbacks are happening, hiring freezes are being implemented. Why? The key reason is that a lot of our IT companies, they are servicing geographies such as US and Europe. And in these geographies, you are seeing that there is muted demand for IT services, or there is muted demand in general. And because of that muted demand, we see that there is not much scope for job creation in these firms, in this sector going ahead. So the job market, it is expected to pick up as the economy improves, right? Global capability centers are getting created in India. They are setting up operations in India. But in the medium term, a lot of jobs are going to be replaced by artificial intelligence, and we have to identify new areas of growth. So while global capability centers is one area where we can, see a high level of employment, a high level of job creation going ahead, we need to identify more such sectors. And we need to appropriately reskill our youth so that they can go ahead and tap opportunities in this sector. So we have to realize that when IT and IT enabled services export boomed from India, so there was a similar and simultaneous shift of students from, let us say, other core branches towards, let us say, IT and computer science and so on. Now, whatever is the new area that is going to emerge, there has to be a simultaneous shift of students towards those areas, so that we can become global champions in those areas as well. So that is something that we need to be very mindful about. This is talking about the headcount. So you can see the headcount of TCS has gone down, the headcount of Infosys has gone down, the headcount of Wipro has gone down, the headcount of HCL Tech has marginally increased, the headcount of Tech Mahindra has increased to a certain extent, and Cognizant have increased to a certain extent, right? So you can see that it's a mixed bag, but your largest companies or the usual culprits such as TCS, Infosys and Wipros, who are considered the bellwether of these sectors, of this sector, their headcount has decreased. Funding winter, this is a term for me personally. It was made relevant by Gaurav Munjal of Unacademy when he wrote to internal stakeholders of Unacademy that funding winter is here, tighten your seat belts, which meant that I lost my job in Unacademy. That was a very difficult period 2 years ago. That kind of funding winter continues to remain in certain sectors in India. So certain startups, they have traditionally been better at identifying growth areas, right? And this startup funding is right now in a rough patch. So again, data is very important. So in 2023, venture capital funds, they invested $9.6 billion in India. That is down, significantly down from $25.7 billion in 2022. This is as per Bain Consultancy, right? Bain and Company. So why is this happening? This is happening because overall there was a contractionary monetary policy across the world, higher interest rates across the world, and there was lower consumption demand across the world. So I want you to be able to note down this particular statistic and use it whenever you get an opportunity to speak about startups. You will always get an opportunity to speak about startups in your papers going ahead. So this note is very, very important, very, very helpful. Now, government had launched a fund of funds scheme for startups so that they can put in money into the startups through, let us say, Small Industries Development Bank of India. Now, this scheme, this contributed or this committed about 10,000 crores to 129 alternative investment funds. So these alternative investment funds will be the funds or will be the stakeholders who will actually identify the startups and will actually put in money into those startups. That is something that you have to be very, very clear about. So again, if you look into the actual working of this particular scheme, it's not so fantastic, right? But the idea was that okay, we will put money into the pockets of fund managers who will then put that money into the pockets of startups. So startups, they have raised concerns about angel tax that was introduced in 2012, right? See, the idea being that all these angel investors, etc., where are they getting the money from which they are investing in startups? And most of these angels and most of these VCs, they are looking at a 10x, 50x, 100x kind of an exit. That if they have invested, let us say, $2 million into a startup, they would like to exit at a valuation of 100x, right? That is the kind of valuation that they're looking at. So a lot of money was getting, let us say, sourced from a dubious number of sources, and that money was being funneled into these startups. What about taxation? What about sharing whatever you have earned or whatever profits that you make or whatever capital gains that you make with the government? What about that? When that question was asked, the answer came in the form of angel tax. So founders complained, those who are, let us say, creating startups, they complained that because of putting an angel tax, you are basically making it difficult for us to raise funding. You are making it difficult for the VCs and angels to gather money and invest and find right exits, etc., etc. So this kind of noise was made, but the government has definitely stuck with angel tax, right? Now they say that this angel tax is hurting them during the funding winter. So some startups, they have come under scrutiny for their treatment of gig workers. Now this is again very, very important, right? So typically startups, they have shoestring budgets or monetary constraints are there in the early phases when they are only working with, let us say, seed round, etc., etc. In general, relying upon gig workers, not providing them social security, not providing them decent wages, not providing them a working contract, not providing them with formal conditions of employment. These are the problems that many startups have been embroiled in. I don't know whether you all have been aware of this or not, but if you see the kind of treatment that Swiggy and Zomato partners get, right? So that is quite difficult. Of course, things have improved in the last 1.5 years across the board, but a lot more needs to be done. So we need to have innovation sure, growth, employment generation sure, but at the same time, welfare will also have to be looked into. So when you're speaking about the startup challenge, right? So you can speak about the funding winter. You can speak about the fact that these schemes have been launched, but they're not doing so well. You can speak about the fact that angel tax related concerns are still there. You can speak about the fact that informalization of the nature of employment in startups can also be a cause of concern going ahead. Okay, so these are the important points that you can speak about. You may probably want to also say that 2021 and 2022 were anomalous years, in the sense that 21-22, these 2 years, they were periods of extremely high level of liquidity across the world. Globally, economies and central banks were trying to come out of pandemic induced slowdown. So they were flushing, they were injecting a lot of cheap money into the system, and that cheap money was funneled therefore into startups. 2023 is back to normal, kind of the normal trend that we were having before pandemic, so to speak. So whether you look at 2020 or 2019, so 2023 is not way low than what 2020 was. So what is the normal? Was normal 21-22? I don't think that 21-22 was the normal, because that was post pandemic, just after pandemic kind of scenario. So there is an alternative way of looking at things. Rather than saying that venture capital investments have dropped by over 62% in 22-23, we can say that we have returned to the baseline of growth that we can envisage over a longer period of time going ahead. So that would be more nicer on your part, and probably more fairer estimation of what's really happening in this ecosystem. Moving ahead, we need to combat fraud. So with IT, with tech enabled platforms, etc., the problem of fraud also becomes a very big problem to tackle. So we need to tackle this. So RBI has imposed curbs on Paytm Payments Bank, because they said that you're not complying with KYC norms and other lapses. Similar kind of clampdown was also done on Kotak Mahindra, where it was said that you will not onboard new credit card customers, if I'm not wrong, because the RBI felt that Kotak Mahindra Bank, the tech architecture, the technology platform, that does not meet all the security requirements that should be adhered to, right? So the important point is that RBI is front-loading customer safety. So yes, digitization and innovation, etc., is important, convenience is important, but customer safety, data privacy, all these things are very, very important, right? In FY24, the frauds that we are talking about, we witnessed approximately 1500 crores worth of fraud. I want you to note down this number as well. Your National Cybercrime Reporting Portal, it recorded 1.1 million complaints last year. I want you to note down this number as well, right? So we need to therefore improve monitoring, we need to respond faster, and we need to educate customers. Basic stuff, digital sanitation, that is what needs to go out of the window a lot more. It needs to be disseminated loudly, strongly, consistently. That is what we need. So RBI is setting up a digital payments intelligence platform so that customer interest can be safeguarded, and this security is going to remain a cat and mouse game, right? RBI will keep trying to catch up, and they will keep taking these kinds of actions going ahead, right? You can see some card and internet related frauds. You can see the data over here. We were at 126 crore in 2019-20, and we have come 1500 crore in 23-24. This is very fast. This is a huge jump, and we need to do something about it. So this is my first article done and dusted. I have spoken about frauds, I have spoken about funding winter, I have spoken about IT jobs, I have spoken about chips, and I have spoken about digital payment infrastructure. Any of these 5 areas that I have spoken about can become a standalone question in your examination, a small question in your examination. Any of these 5 areas can become a small topic of discussion in your interviews. Please have the right approach, the right data point, the right thinking in these particular areas. This is just the start of it, maybe for you, or maybe this is a revision for you, depending upon where you are. But keep reading about these developments. They're very, very important. Okay. Now let's move ahead quickly and talk about RBI's monetary policy committee's decision. That was our topic of discussion on Saturday as well. I shared with you governor's statement, right, which talked in detail about why repo rate was kept unchanged at 6.5%. What are the strong points about the Indian economy that RBI is looking at? What are the weak points that RBI is looking at? How is inflation behaving, and so on. Now let us do a little bit of an analysis of monetary policies committee's decision to keep repo rate unchanged at 6.5%. Okay. Now, the first part of the article over here talks about the difference between monetary policy and fiscal policy. And trust me, a lot of us don't know this or can't articulate this well enough. And the first part of the article is very beautiful, therefore. Okay. Now, what happens in the union budget is that you account for the money that you are going to receive and that you are going to spend. So essentially what you do is that you create a plan of action for the next 12 months. You keep in mind what are your political exigencies. Like for example, if there is, let us say, an election coming up in Assam, you may be tempted to invest into some projects in Assam so that you can win some brownie points with voters in Assam. That is a kind of political exigency. Or maybe if, let us say, women voters are important for your party, important voters for your party, then you can probably start 10 more schemes for taking care of requirements of girls and women, which will help you in winning their favor. I'm just giving examples, not saying good or bad, appropriate or inappropriate, just giving examples of political exigencies. There may be certain economic imperatives that you may address, like for instance, creating jobs, or let's say relieving rural distress may be an economic imperative. Okay. And therefore what you may do is that you may pump in more money into a scheme such as, let us say, Manrega, which can therefore create more jobs in rural areas and will therefore reduce rural distress. So that's an economic imperative, right? But I'm basically trying to say that when you're drafting a union budget, you're essentially creating an account or a plan of action for the next 12 months, keeping in mind political exigencies and economic imperatives, right? And of course, how you are going to raise money so that you can spend that money. That is what the budget does. You know, budget deficits can vary, can fluctuate. Your end result, it can deviate from the original. That is all fine. I mean, nobody really does a very deep scrutiny of what actually, that's unfortunate part of it, but nobody really does a very deep scrutiny of what was actually done than what was actually promised. It should be done, but it doesn't happen. Like for example, we have budget estimates, right? Then we have revised estimates, right? And then we have actual estimates, right? So budget estimates are what we plan to do. Revised estimates are somewhere in the middle of the year we realize that okay, we are not going to meet so and so targets, so we need to revise the targets. Not always, but in some cases. And then when we have final actual estimates coming out, which say that what actually happened. So this entire cycle of budget estimates, revised estimates, actual estimates, this is at least a 2-year long cycle. Okay, so somewhere scrutiny is not such a big a problem over here in this particular scenario. But when we speak about monetary policy, there is deep scrutiny of what is happening. There is, you know, a quarter by quarter 2020 that RBI is playing, and they need to justify their actions. Their actions are scrutinized. Everything is, brought on board, and it is deeply analyzed to see what's really happening. So when RBI decides its monetary policy, they have to use past data. They have to create a path for the near future, and they have to somehow strike a balance between, let us say, inflation, growth, and financial stability. This is the difficulty of RBI's task, and there is deep scrutiny of every action that RBI takes. So slightly I have given you an idea or a hint of how, let us say, fiscal policy differs from monetary policy. Now let us talk about what happened in the recent monetary policy committee meeting. So 7 June was when RBI came out with its decision to hold the repo rate steady at 6.5%, and the fact that they will keep withdrawing accommodation, right, so that inflation can be tamed. Now India is in a sweet spot. Our growth rate is 8.2% for 23-24, and investment demand, consumption demand, government's thrust on capital expenditure, as well as net exports demand, they are all in basically the right direction. We also spoke about the fact that manufacturing sector is doing okay, service sector is doing okay, agriculture is likely to do okay. So all these things are good, but there are certain signs of anxiety that we need to speak about. There are certain weaknesses or problem areas that we need to speak about. Now, one of the problem areas is what is happening externally. Now, US Federal Reserve, US Federal Reserve is very important. Whatever is the interest rate that they decide for their economy, right? So that becomes basically, a benchmark interest rate that you have to keep in mind. Because if, let's say, US Federal Reserve is offering this interest rate and you are offering this interest rate, which is lower than US Federal Reserve's interest rate, then there is probably going to be a flight of funds from your economy to US. Why? Because interest rates are higher over there. You can earn better over there. So why would you keep your money in India? You will take your money abroad. If you keep your interest rates at par with US Federal Reserves, then there will be probably a neutral kind of scenario, right? But there are risks in any and every decision that you take. But the important point that you have to understand as a student of economics is that US Federal Reserve's interest rate, it serves as a fulcrum for globally coordinated central bank action. Everybody is looking at what US Fed is doing. If US Fed is increasing their interest rates, you are forced to increase your interest rates, or you may be having that kind of an imperative, and vice versa. Now, European Central Bank is also a very important central bank, just the way US Federal Reserve is an important central bank of the US economy, which is an important economy across the world. So similarly, European Central Bank is therefore also equally important. Now, what has happened of late is that there has been a little bit of decoupling. So European Central Bank, it decoupled on 6 June and they cut their interest rates. But US Federal Reserve has not cut its interest rate. So one major central bank has held its interest rate steady, which is US. Another central bank has cut its interest rate, which is Europe. What should a developing country's central bank, that is Reserve Bank of India, what should we do? That is a question that we need to answer, and we are in a difficult position. And we have to simultaneously show that our policy is independent, that we are not making our monetary policy looking at what is happening in US and what is happening in Europe. Rather than that, we are looking at India and making our monetary policy. So that is also a challenge for us. So I have explained the external challenge to you. Okay. Now let us talk about certain internal challenges. Okay. Let us talk about internal challenge. First internal challenge is slowing private consumption. Like we have discussed 2 or 3 times already in this series of lecture. You know that first of all, private consumption creates 60% of the aggregate demand in India. So private consumption should grow well. Otherwise, aggregate demand in India may not grow well. That's the basic idea that you need to keep in mind. Private consumption grew by only 4% during 23-24. Why? Because maybe people are having compressed incomes. Maybe people are facing the heat of economic stress. That's why they are not spending so much. So household expenditure is growing, but it is growing at a very lukewarm rate of 4%. The second problem is that private sector has not been willing to undertake strong investment expenditure. So government is putting a lot of money into capex, sure. They're building out highways and ports and airports, and infrastructure is getting built out, sure. But the private sector is not coming to the party as much as the government would like it to. That's the second problem. The third problem that we need to look at is the issue of food inflation. So food inflation has been averaging around 7% throughout 23-24, and it touched 7.9% in April. When your food inflation is as high as 7 to 8%, and you know that food inflation impacts those who are closer to the bottom of pyramid section of population, so food inflation needs to be tamed. When our target of inflation is 4% plus or minus 2%, the target cannot be met if your food inflation is behaving in this manner. So we need to be worried about these 3 points internally. So RBI has a difficult task that it needs to understand what is happening externally and accordingly position itself in a safe manner, and B, we need to look at what is happening internally and need to position itself so that we can take care of all these 3 things simultaneously. This is what RBI has to do. This is the thrust of this article. I hope this is very clear to you. Moving ahead, this is an article which I would like to very quickly give you a sense of and move ahead. This is a very academic article, very good article written by Kaushik Basu, eminent economist himself. So in this article, Kaushik Basu is talking about how economics as a discipline has always been evolving and is also going to evolve going ahead with the advent of artificial intelligence, with the advent of new modes and methods of production and so on. That's what the basic thrust of this article is, right? So I just want to take you to my favorite parts of this particular article. You can read this article. This is my favorite part of the article. So in this part of the article, Kaushik Basu says that industrial revolution was an era of rapid technological innovation. It completely changed the rule of the games, right? In the sense that how you produce goods, where you produce goods, how you remunerate the workers, etc. Everything changed. children entered the workforce, there was heavy pollution, there was heavy urbanization, right? So in this backdrop, or coinciding with this development of industrial revolution or industrial method of production, came Adam Smith's work, The Wealth of Nations in 1776, came Walras's Elements of Pure Economics in 1874, right? Now, these works, they completely changed the way we study economics or the way we understand economics. These works, they laid the foundation for introduction of income tax in Britain in 1842. They laid the foundation for the passage of the US Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. So this discipline, this emerging discipline of economics, right, it emerged in the backdrop, or it coincided with the emergence of industrial revolution, right? Now, mathematics was not necessarily an integral part of this discipline in earlier stages, but going ahead, a lot of mathematics got involved. In the earlier stages of this discipline, it was called political economy, because politics and economics, they were considered intertwined. As more and more mathematics, more and more modeling became an integral part of economics, so it also got slightly detached, let us say, from the political ecosystem in which an economy functions. Okay, but this detachment was never complete, this detachment was never necessary, right? I'll take you to the second best part of this article for me. And that best part of the article over here is that we start going back towards the political roots of this particular discipline, right? Like, for instance, we develop game theory, right? So that game theory, it allows us to have an element of economics and have an element of politics simultaneously in our analytical framework. So in real world, what is happening is that markets, trade, politics, international relations, they are all interconnected, and we need to look at things through a wider lens than through a very narrow lens of mathematical modeling only, right? Is what the basic idea over here is. And again, as more and more data becomes available, and more digitization of our economy takes place, as modes of production changes again going ahead, so economics as a discipline will keep evolving itself. That is the basic thrust of this article. Okay, and there is this last very important bit of article that I wanted to keep over here, was about the revamped Rashtriya Gokul Mission, because Rashtriya Gokul Mission is an important scheme of government of India, and if this scheme is going to be revamped, then you need to know what's happening in this scheme, what was the objective, what did we meet in terms of our goals, and what is it that we are changing going ahead, right? So 100-day action plan for animal health, dairy and conservation is likely to get approved, right? So we will launch a revamped Rashtriya Gokul Mission. We will have animal health system support for One Health, and we will have convergence framework for the National Fodder Mission. So we want to tackle certain problems. What are those problems? Low availability of feed and fodder, that is a problem. Poor livestock health, that is a problem, right? And indigenous breeds falling, so milk productivity is a problem, right? And we want to attract more farmers to dairy farming. Right now, the interest of farmers is definitely there, but we want to increase it, because this can be a good alternative source of income, good supplementary source of income, and we want to work in this direction, right? So these three schemes will cost around 8,000 crore, right? The convergence plan for National Fodder Mission, it will launch by bringing agriculture and rural development ministries on board. The idea being that we need to focus on production, storage and processing for increased availability of dry and green fodder, right? Both these two fodders are important for different kinds of animals at different stages of growth. So we need to get both these ministries on board. Similarly, AHSSOH, this is a part of Animal Health Initiative, and will focus on animal health. It will prevent antimicrobial resistance and so on. Wrong kinds of medicines given can cause a problem going ahead, because then animals will not be able to cure themselves from a variety of diseases, right? So just the way human beings can develop antimicrobial resistance or antibiotic resistance, right? The germs or the diseases within us can develop these resistances. Similarly, germs and microbes and bacteria within animals which cause diseases, they can also develop resistances if they are treated in the wrong manner. So we need to focus upon that. Similarly, we will have a Rashtriya Gokul Mission which will be revamped so that it can bolster development and conservation of indigenous breed, making milk production more remunerative for farmers, right? So that's the basic idea that you need to keep in mind, that grid improvement, productivity, fodder availability, ecosystem, healthcare, all these areas is where we are focusing upon, and significant amount of money is going to be pumped into these areas. So when we actually go around and do all these things, we'll get another opportunity to discuss. But for the time being, this is what I wanted to discuss with you. So I hope that you have learned new things over here, which you'll be able to use in the examination. I can bring my lecture to an end. If there is any doubt, you all can please feel free to ask. Yeah, definitely. Divya has a question. Divya, your question is that what is withdrawing accommodation? See, you have to understand that when we are, basically the idea behind withdrawing accommodation is that when we are trying to control prices, when you're trying to bring inflation down, okay, so what do? You have to basically go towards, let us say, a contractionary monetary policy. So how do you go towards contractionary monetary policy? You go towards contractionary monetary policy by increasing your interest rates. So you have already done that. RBI has increased the repo rate and we are sitting at 6.5%. And still inflation in India, the overall consumer price index in India is around 5%, and food inflation in India is around 7 to 7.5%. Okay. In such a scenario, we are still not meeting the target of our consumer price index being at 4%, right? What is the target for monetary policy committee? The target is that consumer price index should be at 4%. We are still not meeting that target. So how do you push and meet that target? You push and meet that target by withdrawing accommodation, meaning that you start evacuating liquidity out of the system, or you start reducing liquidity from the system. That is what I typically mean by withdrawing accommodation. There are various steps that RBI can take to withdraw accommodation, but the basic idea being that although all the money that was made available to banks, financial institutions for forward lending, for easy lending, so that there can be a support given to demand, which was initiated during the post-pandemic recovery stage, we are reducing all of those facilities. We are removing all of those facilities. We are bringing down the liquidity in the system gradually. That is what I mean by withdrawing accommodation. You can try to Google it up. You'll see something very similar getting discussed. The basic idea being that we are taking these steps so that prices can be cooled down, so that that level of aggregate demand can be moderated, because we don't want price rise or inflation to become entrenched into the Indian economy. That is the basic idea that we need to keep in mind. So I hope that Divya, that answers your question. With this, I'll bring this session to an end. We'll meet tomorrow again. Until then, thank you so much. All the very best. Jai Hind to all of you guys. Bye bye.